Sometimes the people we love the most are the very ones who hurt us the deepest. I gave up everything to raise my son, believing that one day he would look at me with pride. Instead, he chose to bury me under shame and silence. This isn't just a story about betrayal, it's a journey through heartbreak, resilience, and unexpected strength. So settle in and get ready. This is one you won't forget. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Mary Thompson. I'm years old and I live alone in a quiet 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Houston. The walls are thin, the kitchen tiles are cracked, and in the winter the heater makes a strange knocking sound. But it's mine, and for a long time, I thought that was enough. I raised my son, Daniel, here. Well, mostly. In his early years, he followed me from house to house, watching me scrub toilets and polish floors in homes that looked like palaces. Compared to our modest place, I never had much, but I always had him, or at least, I believed I did. I worked as a house cleaner for more than 30 years. I woke up before sunrise, packed my lunch in old plastic containers, and caught the first bus downtown. I cleaned marble countertops I could never afford, wiped down stainless steel appliances worth more than my rent, and watched my employer's children grow up surrounded by luxury, while my own son wore hand-me-downs from church donations. Daniel was smart, so bright that I always believed he was meant for something bigger. I pushed him to study, to read, to work hard. I took double shifts just to save for his college fund. When he got accepted into a university out of state, I cried for days. Not because he was leaving, but because it felt like I had finally done something right. But during those college years, something in him changed. He stopped calling as often. When I visited, he never introduced me to his friends. At first, I told myself he was just busy. Then I started noticing the hesitation in his voice whenever I mentioned my job. The pause before he said, "My mom cleans houses," that pause told me everything still. I held on to hope. Eventually, Daniel moved back to Houston, but not to my neighborhood. He rented a sleek apartment downtown, far removed from my modest life. Our visits became fewer, our conversations shorter. Then one afternoon, over lukewarm coffee in a cafe whose name I couldn't even pronounce, he told me he was getting married. Her name was Emily. She was beautiful, educated, and well-connected. Her family came from old money, generations of oil and real estate wealth. He showed me a photo of the two of them, his arm around her waist, her laughter frozen mid-moment. Both of them dressed like they belonged on the cover of a magazine. "You must be so happy," I said, forcing a smile while my throat tightened. "I am," he replied, nodding, his eyes drifting away. "But Mom, I need to ask you for something." I assumed he wanted help with planning, or maybe advice, something small, something motherly. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "I need you to buy the wedding rings." I blinked. "What? My accounts are tied up right now with some transfers," he rushed on. "I'll pay you back. It's just temporary." He spoke quickly, too smoothly. I knew that tone. It was the same one he used as a child when he'd broken a window, or lost his lunch money, the voice he used when he wanted something but didn't want to ask. "I don't have much, Daniel," I said gently. "I know," he replied, still not looking at me. "But it would mean a lot. It's a symbol, right? A symbol." That's what he called it. I laughed softly, bitterly. I wanted to say no. I should have said no. But I didn't. A week later, I sold the gold bracelet my late husband gave me on our 10th anniversary. I emptied the emergency jar above the fridge, the one I hadn't touched in years. And when that still wasn't enough, I pawned my mother's locket, the only piece of her I had left. It wasn't fancy, but it mattered. Or at least, it used to. With the money, I bought a beautiful pair of rings, simple, elegant, timeless. I imagined Emily's face when she saw them. I imagined her thanking me, hugging me, welcoming me into her life. I imagined finally being part of something. When I asked Daniel if I could meet Emily before the wedding, he hesitated. "She's really busy," he mumbled. "I don't need a long meeting," I said. "Just a hello." I said quietly. "I just want to see the woman my son is marrying." He gave me a thin, careful smile. "I'll see what I can do." And just like that, I became a background character in my own son's life. Still, I held on to hope, because that's what mothers do. We hold on even when everything is slipping through our fingers. And deep down, I had no idea just how invisible I was about to become. It was a Saturday morning when Daniel called again. His voice was upbeat, almost too polished, like he'd practiced sounding excited. "Mom," he said, "the rehearsal dinner is next weekend. Emily's parents are hosting it at their country club. I thought maybe you could stop by. Just for a bit." My chest fluttered. Was this it? Was I finally going to meet her? "I'd love to," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Thank you, Daniel." There was a pause, just a second too long. "Just one thing," he added. "Don't feel like you have to dress up or anything. It's casual." My heart sank, but I didn't let it show. "I'll look nice," I told him. "Nothing fancy." The week crawled by. I pressed my only good blouse, the one I saved for church or the occasional job interview. I shined my black flats with a damp rag and stopped by the small bakery down the street to buy a box of cookies. Something to bring. Something to show I cared. When I arrived at the country club, my nerves nearly gave out. The valet looked me up and down before taking my keys. And the way he handled my old car told me everything. It didn't belong there. Neither did I, but I lifted my chin and walked inside anyway. It felt like stepping into a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. Floors gleamed. Waiters in white gloves moved effortlessly through the room. Laughter bounced off the walls as guests sipped champagne and nibbled on hors d'oeuvres. I couldn't even pronounce dot, and then I saw him. My son stood tall in a tailored navy suit, laughing easily with a group of polished strangers. He looked like he belonged there, like he'd never known anything outside that world. He noticed me. His smile flickered just for a moment before he walked over. "Mom," he said quietly. "Glad you made it." Before I could answer, a woman stepped up beside him, blonde, elegant. Her dress probably cost more than my rent. "Emily," she said with a polite smile. I opened my mouth to introduce myself, to tell her how lovely she looked, how happy I was for them, but Daniel spoke first. "Emily, this is Mary," he said. "She's an old family friend." The words caught in my throat. A family friend, not his mother, not the woman who raised him, not the one who worked her fingers raw so he could have a better life, just a friend. Emily smiled and nodded. "It's so nice to meet you, Mary. Thank you for coming." I forced a smile, gripping the box of cookies behind my back. "It's lovely to meet you too, dear." For the next hour, I stood in the corner of that shining room, pretending I belonged, pretending I wasn't bleeding inside. No one spoke to me. I sipped water from a thin glass and watched my son glow in a life I was no longer part of. He never looked my way again. I left before dessert. No one noticed at home. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the unopened box of cookies. My thoughts drifted to the ring box tucked away in my drawer, the wedding bands. I'd spent nearly everything I had to buy. He hadn't even introduced me that night. I wasn't his mother. I was a ghost in a room full of laughter. I was the past he had buried. And for the first time in a very long time, something shifted deep inside me. Not just pain, not just heartbreak. Resolved. The night after the rehearsal dinner, sleep wouldn't come. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room, trying to make sense of what had happened. He called me a friend. A friend. I replayed the moment again and again. How quickly he said it. How easily the words slipped out. No hesitation, no guilt. It was as if he'd rehearsed it, as if he'd already decided I would be nothing more than a prop, tucked into a corner while he lived the life he'd always wanted. The next morning, I stood alone in my tiny kitchen, holding the wedding rings in my hands. They were beautiful. I had chosen those rings carefully, knowing they were meant to symbolize the beginning of a new chapter for Daniel and his wife. And now, every time I looked at them, my stomach turned. I felt sick. Still, a part of me tried to make peace with it. Maybe he panicked, I told myself. Maybe he was just nervous. The next day, I called him just to talk. He didn't answer. I left a message. He never returned it. Then the wedding day arrived. I waited by the phone, hoping it would ring, hoping he'd say, "Mom, come. I made a mistake. I want you there." But the phone stayed silent, just the way he wanted me to be. The rings sat in their small velvet box on my coffee table. I picked them up and stared down at them, my reflection warped in the polished gold. These rings didn't belong to him anymore. Not after what he'd done. I slipped them into my purse and left the house. Not to go to the wedding. I knew I wasn't welcome there, but just to walk, to clear my head. My feet carried me without purpose, block after block, through old neighborhoods and empty sidewalks. With every step, the weight in my chest grew heavier. I passed the bus stop where Daniel and I used to wait when he was in grade school. He would hold my hand and ask why we didn't have a car like the other kids. I always told him, "Because we're saving for your future." I walked past the old bakery where I once bought him a chocolate cupcake. After his first day on a math test, he hugged me so tightly that day and told me I was the best mom in the world. Where did that boy go? By the time I made it back home, the sun was setting. I stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. That's when I noticed the metal lockbox tucked in the back of my closet. The one I hadn't opened in years. It held all the important things. Old tax forms, birth certificates, my husband's military discharge papers. I don't know what made me pull it out that night. Maybe I needed to feel close to someone who had truly loved me. Maybe I needed to remind myself that I still mattered to someone. When I opened the box, the musty scent of paper and time rose up to meet me. I sifted through the documents, my hands trembling slightly, and then I found it. An envelope, hidden beneath the final page of our old mortgage contract. It was addressed to me in my husband's handwriting. I hadn't seen that writing in decades. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear. Inside was a letter. A short one. And several neatly folded documents. Stock certificates. Dozens of them. At first, I didn't understand. But then I saw the names: tech companies, energy firms. Companies that meant nothing 20 years ago, but were household names now. My heart began to pound as I typed the serial numbers into an online stock value checker. One by one, the results appeared. With every number, every new total, my hands shook harder. I wasn't just holding paper. I was holding a small fortune. I couldn't breathe. I leaned back in my chair, gripping the edge of the table as the numbers blurred in front of my eyes. He had left this for me quietly, without ceremony. My husband, who never carried more than a few bills in his wallet, had invested everything he had into a future he might never live to see. And now that future had arrived, I was no longer poor. I was wealthy. And no one knew. For so long, I believed I was nothing more than a tired old cleaning lady, barely scraping by. But in a single night, everything changed. Daniel thought he could erase me, that he could hide the parts of his life he didn't want the world to see. But he had no idea who he was trying to bury, because buried things don't disappear. Sometimes they come back stronger. And this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. I didn't sleep at all that night. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made it impossible. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea, my husband's letter in one hand, and the printed stock values spread out before me like a map to a new life he never told me. All those years, he must have quietly set aside bits and pieces of his paycheck. We never had much, but he was smart, quiet, thoughtful, always planning for the future. I used to joke that if I let him, my husband would hide money inside the walls. Now, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. What stunned me even more than the money was the care he had taken, the attention to detail. He had signed every certificate, filed all the paperwork correctly, and even left instructions on how to claim everything, including the name of a financial advisor he had once trusted. He must have done all of this shortly before he died. It was as if he knew I would need a way out one day, and maybe, just maybe, he knew the person who would need it most was the woman who would give up everything for a son who would one day forget her. I spent the next 2.5 days working through the process. I contacted the advisor listed in the documents. To my surprise, he was still working in Houston. After verifying my identity and reviewing the paperwork, his tone shifted: respectful, curious, even slightly stunned. It was the first time in years someone looked at me like I mattered, like I was worth listening to. Double quotes, Mrs. Thompson, he said once the numbers were tallied. You might want to sit down. I laughed, though it sounded more like a gasp. I already am. He slid a sheet of paper across the desk, neatly printed with a series of figures. This isn't just retirement money, he said. This could change your life. It already had. I walked out of that office in a haze. But one thing was crystal clear in my mind: I didn't owe anyone silence anymore. Especially not Daniel. I had spent nearly 6 decades being humble, patient, forgiving. I endured things no mother ever should, being erased, disrespected, minimized. And even when I had nothing, I gave everything. But now I had a choice, and I chose dignity. The wedding was the next day. That morning, I stood in front of the mirror. The ring box sat unopened on my dresser. I wore a simple black dress. No makeup, my hair pulled back neatly. I didn't cry. Not anymore. I held the rings for a long moment. Gold, smooth, flawless. A perfect symbol of something already broken. I placed them back in the box and zipped it into my purse, not for delivery. I wasn't going to the wedding. I wasn't going to watch my son smile and lie while pretending I didn't exist. And I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of ignoring me to my face. Instead, I opened my laptop. I created a folder inside it. I dropped screenshot after screenshot, dozens of them. Messages from over the years where Daniel belittled me. Moments where he dismissed my love, laughed at my work, talked openly about hiding his background from Emily and her family. One message stopped me cold. I just can't let her meet my mom. She's, not really someone you show off. I stared at that line until it blurred. Not really someone you show off. I wasn't ashamed anymore. I had scrubbed marble floors and cleaned strangers' toilets for decades. I had raised a boy into a man. I had given everything I had, and now I was the one with power, with legacy, with proof that I had never been small. Late that night, I sealed the velvet box with the rings inside, saved the folder of screenshots onto a flash drive, and wrapped everything carefully in tissue paper. I wrote a note, short, firm, and honest, to the woman who was about to marry my son. Caution. Some men bury their past. Others just pretend it never existed. But the truth always finds a way to rise. Mari didn't sign it, Mom. That title had been erased long before I was ready to give it up. The next morning, I mailed the package directly to Emily's apartment. Overnight delivery. No return address. And then I sat back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't cleaning up someone else's mess. I was quietly allowing the truth to be seen. Daniel thought I would stay in the background forever, that I would always be the invisible mother. Quietly supportive, endlessly forgiving. What he forgot is this: people only stay invisible when they don't know their worth. And now, I knew exactly who I was. The sun had barely risen when I stepped outside and slipped the small padded envelope into the mailbox. There was something final about it, the soft click as the door shut. The quiet hum of a world still asleep. I stood there for a long moment, staring down the empty street, feeling the sharp edge of the morning air against my face. It was done. Inside that package was everything: the rings I had paid for with the last of my savings, the truth my son had buried, and the dignity I had finally reclaimed. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear, focused. A part of me still mourned the idea of the wedding, the family I had hoped to join, the warm picture I'd carried in my heart of a celebration where I was seen, loved, and wanted. But that image had never truly existed. It had only lived in my mind. That morning, I didn't put on a dress. I didn't do my hair. I stayed home. I made coffee. I sat on the couch. I waited. The phone never rang. There was no text, no apology, no last-minute invitation, nothing, and I realized I didn't need it. For so long, I had held on to the hope that Daniel would come around, that he would outgrow his embarrassment, his pride, his hunger to be accepted by people who had never known struggle. But he didn't. He leaned into it. He built a life that didn't include me. Not really. Not unless it was convenient. I watched the clock as the wedding hour passed. 11 o'clock, noon, 1. At some point, I walked into my bedroom, opened the drawer where I had hidden the financial papers, and picked up the phone. It was time. I called the financial advisor again, this time to begin the process of transferring the stock into my name and liquidating a portion of it. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want luxury cars or a brand new wardrobe. I wanted security, quiet power, a way to rebuild my life on my own terms. The advisor, Mr. Gaines, was efficient and respectful. He guided me through everything: transferring the holdings, setting up accounts, assigning a lawyer to finalize the estate matters my husband had left behind. "You'll want someone to manage this for you, Mary," he said gently. "It's a lot to carry alone." I paused. "I've carried bigger things alone," I replied. We both laughed softly. When the wedding day ended and the world moved on, I did too. That night, I cooked myself dinner, not because I was hungry, but because I wanted to. A steak, roasted vegetables, a glass of wine. I sat at my small table, the one Daniel used to do his homework on, and lit a candle. Not for romance. Not for anyone else. Just for me. For the woman who had finally stepped out of the shadows. Later that evening, I pulled a notebook from the drawer and began to write a list. Not of revenge. Not of punishments. But of possibilities, ideas, projects, dreams. Things I had always wanted to do but never dared. Because there was never enough time, never enough money, never enough me. Now I had all three. And in that quiet moment, I realized something. Daniel might have erased me from his story, but I was just beginning to write mine. It arrived 2 days after the wedding. A small, neatly wrapped box sat at the front desk of Emily's upscale apartment building. No return address. No celebratory note. Just her name, printed cleanly on the label. As if the package itself had been waiting for this exact moment. Emily opened it alone. Daniel was at work, or so he had said that morning. She sat at the kitchen island, sipping her matcha latte, still wearing her robe, scrolling through emails. When she noticed the package, she assumed it was a delayed gift from a guest or maybe something from a vendor. But when she lifted the lid, her hand froze. Inside were the wedding rings, the same ones Daniel had shown her in a hurry, claiming they'd been ordered by his assistant. They rested in their original velvet case, gleaming beneath the kitchen lights. But it wasn't just the rings that caught her attention. There was also a flash drive and a folded note. She opened the paper and read the words slowly. Caution. Some men bury their past. Others just pretend it never existed. But truth always finds a way to rise. Marish blinked, once, then again. The name hit her like a slap. Mary. The name Daniel barely mentioned. A family friend, he'd said. A woman who helped raise him. Someone from his past. With trembling hands, Emily plugged the flash drive into her laptop. At first, nothing happened. Then a folder appeared. Truth inside. She clicked. Dozens of screenshots filled the screen. Texts, emails, fragments of conversations between Daniel and others. Some were years old. Some were recent. But every single one told the same story. Me, or rather Daniel trying to erase me. My mom's great. Just not really the kind of woman you bring to a place like this. I just don't think Emily would understand. She's used to a different lifestyle. Mary? She's like family, but not actually. More like someone who helped out. She cleaned houses, for God's sake. Do you really think Emily's parents would be okay with that? Emily kept scrolling. Her face drained of color, her breathing growing shallow. Then she reached the photos. There I was at the rehearsal dinner standing awkwardly in the background, clutching a box of cookies like it was a lifeline. No one beside me. No one acknowledging me. Just a woman quietly pushed out of the frame. The room fell silent. Emily closed the laptop and sat perfectly still for a full minute. Her eyes didn't move. Her lips didn't twitch. But something inside her shifted cracked. She didn't call Daniel. Instead, she got dressed. She pulled her hair back into a loose ponytail and walked out of the apartment. Without even taking her phone. She walked 3 blocks. Then 6, until she found herself in a quiet neighborhood she didn't recognize. Standing in front of a modest brick building, the kind of place where people lived real lives. She stood there, uncertain, until an elderly man sitting on a nearby bench looked up. "You looking for Mary?" he asked, like it was the most natural question in the world. Emily blinked. Yes. How did you know?" He smiled softly. "She's the only one folks come looking for around here." He pointed toward a door on the 2nd floor. Emily climbed the stairs, unsure of what she would say or even why she was there. But something inside her needed to see, needed to know. She knocked once, then twice. I opened the door wearing a simple blouse and slacks, no makeup. My hair pulled back. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then she spoke. "You're not a friend of the family." I didn't answer. "You're his mother," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was quiet, like she was finally fitting together pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known was incomplete. "Yes," I said, calm and steady. Emily stepped inside. We sat at my kitchen table. I made tea. She hadn't asked for it, but she drank every drop. She asked questions, and I answered them about the jobs I worked, the years I struggled, the things I gave up. I told her how I bought the rings with what little I had, how I stood at her rehearsal dinner as a stranger, how I used to be proud of my son. By the time I finished, her eyes were filled with tears. Not tears of guilt, but of understanding, of finally seeing the truth behind the man she had married. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Don't be," I said gently. "You didn't know, but I do now," she replied. "And I won't forget." She stood to leave, then turned back. "I'm going to fix this. And if you let me, I want to help you too." I watched her walk away, her shoulders straighter than when she had arrived. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew something had changed. For the first time in a very long time, someone truly saw me. And this time, they wouldn't forget. It was evening when Daniel came home. He loosened his tie and dropped his keys onto the granite countertop like he always did. At first, he didn't notice the silence. Emily often worked late, but tonight felt different. The lights were dim. The apartment was spotless. And sitting on the kitchen island right where his laptop usually rested was a small velvet box. He stopped. "The rings," he frowned and reached for them. That's when he noticed the flash drive lying beside the box. And then the folded note, not in Emily's handwriting. The moment his eyes landed on the signature, his stomach tightened. "Mary." He didn't open the drive right away. He paced the apartment, muttering under his breath, panic creeping up his throat. When he finally sat down, his hands were shaking as he plugged the flash drive into his laptop. It took only a few clicks. A folder appeared. "Truth." He opened it and there he was, his words, his voice, his shame. Every careless message, every offhand remark, every time he reduced me to help or someone who raised him instead of calling me what I was, his mother. Words he thought had vanished into the digital void now stared back at him like ghosts. He slammed the laptop shut, furious. But the silence that followed was unbearable. He called Emily. No answer. He called again. Nothing. By midnight, the dread inside him had hardened into something colder, something that couldn't be undone with flowers or charm. He tried to delete messages, to erase the past, but it was too late. Emily was gone. She didn't scream when she left. She didn't leave a note. Just an empty suitcase and a half-cleared closet. Daniel sat alone in the darkness, surrounded by everything he had worked so hard to build: the apartment, the suits, the carefully curated life. For the first time, it all felt hollow, fragile. Daniel picked up his phone and stared at my name on the screen. He didn't call. Instead, he sank back onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly, and how long it would take to piece it back together. Meanwhile, I wasn't thinking about Daniel at all. I was on the phone with Emily. She called me the next morning. "I walked away," she said. "I couldn't stay married to someone who builds his life on lies." "I'm sorry you had to go through that," I told her. "No," she replied quietly. "I needed to see it. And now I want to make sure you're never treated that way again." She asked if we could meet this time at her office. It was a bright, modern space in downtown Houston with high ceilings, glass walls, and a sweeping view of the skyline. I walked in feeling nervous, but Emily greeted me with a hug. A real one. I've been thinking, she said, motioning toward the sleek chairs across from her desk. My company is expanding. We need someone grounded, someone experienced, someone with real leadership potential. She looked straight at me. Someone like you. I blinked. Me, she smiled. You've lived a life most people couldn't survive. You've managed people, budgets, schedules, and you raised a son who graduated with honors. You know how to work. And you know how to lead. I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. Let me train you, she said gently. Let me invest in you the way you invested in him. I nodded. Overwhelmed not just by the opportunity but by being seen. By being chosen. Not out of pity but because someone finally recognized my worth. That week, I began the onboarding process. I shadowed meetings. Learned new systems. Adapted quickly. And something inside me woke up, a sharpness I thought time had dulled. A part of myself that had been buried under years of sacrifice was finally rising to the surface. 2 weeks later, Daniel showed up at my apartment. Not to apologize. To demand answers. Why would you do that? He snapped, standing in my doorway like he still belonged there. You ruined everything. I didn't flinch. No, I said calmly. You did that all by yourself. You had no right. He shot back. I had every right, I replied. I bought the rings. I raised you. I gave you everything. And you erased me. He scoffed and looked around my apartment like it was beneath him. So this is about revenge? I stepped forward. No, this is about respect, something you stopped giving me a long time ago. He said nothing. Just stood there, fists clenched like a child who'd lost control of his own game. I'm building something now, I added. Something for me. You don't have to understand it. But you don't get to sabotage it either. He turned and walked away. No goodbye. Not even a backward glance. And for the first time, I didn't care. Because I finally understood something. Some people only show up when they need something. But the ones who truly see you, the ones who stay, don't need anything at all. They simply recognize your light. The first time I walked into the executive offices of Emily's company, it felt like stepping into another world. Glass doors opened with a soft whisper. Floors shone like polished stone. The air smelled faintly of citrus and confidence. I clutched my worn leather bag a little tighter, feeling out of place but refusing to let it show. Emily met me in the lobby. Her smile warm and steady. Come on, she said, guiding me past rows of desks, sleek computers, and young professionals dressed in tailored clothes. I glanced around and laughed softly. This isn't where I thought I'd end up. She turned to me, her voice gentle but certain. It's exactly where you're supposed to be. Over the next few weeks, Emily kept her promise. She didn't just give me a job, she mentored me. She sat beside me during onboarding, introduced me to the leadership team, and put me in charge of operations for a new community outreach initiative. My background, my instincts, my ability to see what needed fixing, suddenly, it all mattered. I wasn't the invisible woman standing in the background anymore. People listened when I spoke. They met my eyes. They respected me. At first, it felt strange to be acknowledged, to be heard. After years of shrinking myself to fit into Daniel's world, I had forgotten what it felt like to take up space. And Emily, she didn't just see my potential. She celebrated it. You know what I think? She said it during a late meeting one evening. As we reviewed program numbers and community feedback, I think you've been leading your whole life. Emily said, you just never had a title for it. That stayed with me. I started showing up to work in tailored clothes Emily had given me after our first week. Nothing flashy, just a few things, she'd said, handing me the box. Things that matched the woman I see. When I looked in the mirror for the first time in years, I didn't see a tired maid or a forgotten mother. I saw a woman with power, with history, with presence. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was quietly unraveling. Emily didn't talk about him much, but I heard things, whispers from mutual acquaintances. Updates passed along through shared contacts. After the separation, his employer began reviewing internal complaints. It turned out Daniel's obsession with projecting a perfect image wasn't limited to his personal life. It had seeped into his work, too. Ethical concerns, misrepresentation, quiet HR meetings that led to quiet consequences. He lost his job, moved out of his high-rise apartment, ended up renting a room in someone's basement on the outskirts of town. Emily never gloated. She never used it as a weapon. That wasn't who she was. I won't pretend I felt nothing. A part of me felt vindicated, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because life has a way of teaching the lessons we refuse to learn. Daniel had built his entire identity on a lie, one he maintained by pushing me into the shadows. And now, without the job, the money, or the marriage, there was no one left to blame but himself. I never heard from him directly. No apology. No explanation, but I didn't need one anymore. I was becoming someone else, someone I had always been, but never allowed myself to be. One afternoon, Emily invited me to join a panel at a women's leadership conference. I was terrified. I couldn't imagine what I had to say that would inspire anyone, but she believed in me. "I want them to hear your story," she said. "The real one," so I said yes. I stood on that stage in a simple navy dress, holding the microphone with shaking hands. And I told the truth. About raising a child alone. About cleaning houses for people who never looked me in the eye. About giving and giving only to be forgotten. And then I told them about discovering something I didn't even know I had: my power, my worth, my voice. When I finished, the room was silent, then the applause came, and that night, I understood something important. You don't need a spotlight to shine. Sometimes, you just need someone to tell you it's okay to stop hiding. And finally, I wasn't hiding anymore. It's strange how the world can change so quietly. No explosions. No grand announcements. Just small shifts, one door closing, another unlocking somewhere else. That's how I learned Daniel had lost his job, not from him. From a former neighbor who still kept in touch, a woman I used to help with laundry. When her back gave out, she called one evening to chat, and in the middle of talking about her granddaughter's graduation, she casually added, "Oh, and your son? I heard he's not working anymore." Something about issues at the firm. I didn't react right away. I just nodded and hummed politely. But after we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring into nothing. What I felt wasn't joy. It wasn't sadness either. It was something colder still. Daniel had built his entire identity around escaping the life I gave him, climbing upward with charm, image, and careful distance. But when the illusion collapsed, he was left with the truth he had tried so hard to bury. And that truth was me. Later, I learned he had moved into a friend's garage apartment. No real lease. Just a favor. Someone doing for him what I had done for years. He had reached the part of life where pride starts to taste like rust. I didn't reach out. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. I was already somewhere else. Emily's mentorship had grown into a real partnership. I was overseeing operations, managing teams, streamlining systems, even designing a new initiative to connect underprivileged women with professional mentors. With every step forward, I left behind another piece of the woman I used to be, the one who waited, hoped, and made herself small. But I didn't erase her. I honored her because she was the reason I survived. I moved into a new place. Nothing flashy or enormous, just clean, bright, and mine. It had a small garden, and along the fence I planted sunflowers. Big, bold flowers that reached for the sky without apology, the way I was learning to do. One day, I received a message. Not from Daniel, but from one of his former colleagues. It was brief. "I know this is personal," it read, "but he talks about you a lot now. Says he messed up. Says he didn't see what he had." I didn't reply. I just sat there, wondering how long it would take for those words to come from him instead of someone else. Weeks passed. Emails from the mentorship program poured in, stories from women who had found jobs, started businesses, rebuilt their lives. Every message felt familiar. In each one, I recognized a piece of myself. At night, I sometimes thought about Daniel. Where he slept, what he ate, what he told himself to make it through the day. I wondered if he missed the sound of my voice. If he regretted the way he used to flinch when I showed up in public. The way his voice dropped when he told people I cleaned houses for a living. What I felt wasn't pity. It was distance, the kind that comes after years of carrying a weight alone. And finally deciding to set it down. Then one afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. No delivery. No appointment. When I opened it, I froze. It was Daniel. He looked thinner, paler. His clothes were wrinkled. His eyes tired. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just stood there staring at me like he wasn't sure I was real. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "Hi, Mom." It was the first time in years he'd said it without hesitation, but I didn't invite him in. Not yet. Because forgiveness isn't a doorway you step through. It's a journey. And mine had only just begun. He stood on my porch like a boy again, not the man he became or the man he tried so hard to be. No designer suit. No perfect posture. Just Daniel, stripped bare by life, by truth, by consequence. "Hi, Mom," he said again. Softer this time. The word lingered, like a question he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. I held his gaze for a long moment. Then, calmly, I said, "You should go." His face flickered confusion, maybe disbelief. He hadn't expected that. He probably thought the door would open and I'd pull him into my arms. "Fix everything like I always had, please," he whispered. "Just let me talk." "I heard enough when you didn't let me talk," I said. "You had years to call me that, to call me. And now you show up because your life fell apart." He started to respond, but I raised my hand. I'm not doing this on the porch, I said gently. And not today, he nodded slowly. Okay, I'm sorry, I closed the door softly. And for the first time, I didn't cry, instead. I turned on the radio, brewed a cup of tea, and sat at my desk reviewing proposals for a new partnership. Emily had connected me to a national nonprofit supporting older women re-entering the workforce. They wanted me to lead a regional program. Me, the woman who once begged strangers to let her clean their houses so her son could have a future. Now I was being invited to help shape other women's futures. The first time I told my story publicly, it felt like tearing open a scar. I stood under soft lights in front of an auditorium full of strangers. My palms were slick. My heart raced. But as I spoke about raising a son alone, about invisible work, about being erased, the room grew quiet. When I finished, they stood. They applauded. Some cried, not because my story was rare, but because it wasn single quotes d. There were so many Marys out there. So many women who gave their lives to others and disappeared in the process. So I kept speaking. I kept showing up, podcasts, panels, webinars. My inbox filled with messages from women saying, "You reminded me who I am." I never spoke Daniel's name. Not out of bitterness, out of choice. This story was mine now. And slowly, something incredible happened. I became known, not as someone's mother, not as someone's employee, but as me. One afternoon, I was invited to deliver a keynote at a women's summit in Dallas. Hundreds of women filled the room, cameras, lights, quiet anticipation. I wore a dark green dress, simple jewelry, my hair pinned back. When I stepped onto the stage and looked out at the crowd, young women, older women, and everyone in between, I told the truth. My name is Mary Thompson, I said. And for most of my life, I believed I only mattered if I was helping someone else shine. But the truth is, we all deserve to shine. Not just behind the scenes. Not only when someone gives us permission, but boldly, loudly, on our own. The applause rolled through the room like thunder. As I walked off the stage, I caught sight of someone standing near the back. Daniel. He didn't come closer. He didn't try to stop me. He just stood there watching. His face was unreadable. But his eyes, there was no arrogance left in them. No shame either. Just something quieter. Something closer to recognition. Before I could say anything, he slipped away, and that was enough. For the first time, I wasn't chasing him. I was moving forward. And this time, he was the one following. A week later, he came back. This time, he knocked softly like someone asking permission. I opened the door. We stood there in silence, two remnants of a family that once existed. He looked thinner than I remembered. Older, too. Or maybe it was just the weight he carried now, the kind that doesn't sit on your shoulders, but settles deep in your soul. "Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't say yes, but I stepped aside. He sat on the couch where he used to do his homework, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. I sat across from him and waited. He took a breath and let it out slowly. "I don't know how to start," he said. "Then tell the truth," I replied. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I was embarrassed," he admitted. "Not of you, of myself, of how we grew up, of never having enough. I thought if I pretended it never happened, I could finally belong somewhere else." His voice cracked. "And in trying to escape all of that, I erased you, the person who gave me everything. I stayed quiet. I told myself it was for your protection," he continued. "That if Emily's family didn't know the details, they wouldn't judge you. But that wasn't true. I wasn't protecting you. I was protecting myself." Tears filled his eyes, but he blinked them back. "You didn't deserve that. Any of it." My throat tightened. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Like a man finally being honest with himself. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said softly. "But I needed you to know. I see what I did. And I'm sorry for all of it." I looked at him for a long time. This was the boy I raised. The one who used to fall asleep beside me on the bus after school, clutching his backpack like it held the whole world. The one who used to leave me notes that said, "You're the best mom ever." Now here he was, broken, remorseful, uncertain. A boy again. And finally, a man. "I never stopped loving you," I said. "Even when you tried to erase me. Even when it broke me." He looked up, eyes red. "Then why didn't you reach out?" I leaned back and folded my hands. "Because I finally learned that love doesn't mean losing yourself. I had to choose me for once." He nodded slowly. "I understand that now." I stood and walked to the small bookshelf by the window. I pulled out a photograph, one of us from years ago. Him in middle school, grinning, his arm slung over my shoulder. "You forgot where you came from," I said, handing it to him. But I didn't. He held the photo like it might shatter. "I don't know how to fix this," he whispered. I sat beside him, my voice steady. "You don't fix it. You live with it. You carry it. And you do better." He nodded, unable to speak. We sat there in silence. Not the painful kind, the kind that heals. As the light from the window shifted across the room, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything. The apology I never thought I'd hear had finally come. It didn't change the past, but it softened something sharp inside me. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant I was free. He stood to leave. I didn't hug him. I didn't tell him to stay. I simply walked him to the door. Before he left, he looked back. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. I wish I had said that sooner, I nodded. "You'll have to live with that too," and then he was gone. I stood in my quiet apartment, feeling more whole than I ever had. Not because he came back, but because I didn't need him to. The envelope was light in my hands. Just one sheet of paper inside. I wrote it the way I wrote everything these days, slowly, deliberately, without apology, no anger. No need for response, just truth. I sealed it, wrote his name on the front, and mailed it that afternoon. No return address. I didn't need one. Inside I had written, "I always stood right in front of you. You just chose not to see me, but I saw you. All of you. I saw the scared little boy trying to fit in. The man trying to outrun his past. You buried me under shame, but I grew anyway. I forgave you long before you asked. Not because you earned it, but because I needed to be free. I'll always love you. But now I love myself, too. You'll have to find your own way back. I'll be here when you do." I didn't expect an answer. I didn't need one. The months that followed were full, not busy, full. Every day brought something new, a workshop to lead, a story to hear, a woman to mentor. I laughed more. I cooked more. I planted sunflowers again, but this time in the front yard, tall, bright, and unashamed. I wanted the world to see them. Then came the invitation, a national summit on women's empowerment. The keynote speaker had dropped out. They wanted me. I flew to New York, wearing a navy blue suit Emily had picked out for me. Backstage, I felt the buzz of the crowd, anticipation humming in the air. When they called my name, the applause rose like a wave. I stepped into the light. Hundreds of eyes watched me cross the stage. I took the mic, smiled, and began. "My name is Mary Thompson. For most of my life, I believed love meant sacrifice. I thought being invisible was part of being a good mother, a good woman. But I was wrong. You don't have to disappear to matter. You don't have to suffer to be worthy. And you don't have to be silent to be respected." I told my story. Every painful inch of it, the long hours, the broken dreams, the betrayal, the awakening. I spoke of how I stopped waiting to be chosen and chose myself. When I finished, the silence was thick with emotion. Then came the applause. Not polite, thunderous. As I walked off the stage, hands reached out to shake mine. Eyes filled with tears. Women whispered, "Thank you. That was my story, too. You gave me hope." And then, near the very back, I saw him, Daniel. He wasn't dressed up. He didn't try to come forward. He just stood there, watching. Our eyes met. I didn't smile. He didn't wave. But in that quiet second, everything was said. He saw me truly, finally. And I saw him. Not as a mistake. Not as a wound. But as part of a journey that had brought me here. I turned and walked away from the stage. The lights warm on my shoulders. I was no longer the woman who waited in corners. I was no longer the mother begging to be recognized. I was Mary Thompson. And I had risen. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.